It was so endearing and so wonderful. And he smiled so much as a young child. He smiled a lot as a young child. Very blonde hair. He had the blue eyes, and he was quite a guy. And he didn't argue much. If he wanted something and you didn't give it to him, he would just collapse on the floor, and he would just stay that way until he got what he wanted. So that was his non-aggressive Gandhi kind of philosophy, where it was non-violent. He would just drop.
And so he was the German?
He was a German. What I did was he had ear infections when he was about 2, and when he had the ear infections, that reduced his ability to hear, which reduced his ability to speak, because we hear other people speak, and a lot of our speech process is based on that. Well, he couldn't hear well, so he didn't speak as early as a lot of kids did. So when we would go somewhere, I would say, somebody would try to talk to him. They'd say, "Oh, hi, honey," an adult, and I'd say, "I'm sorry, he doesn't speak English." We adopted him from Germany. He had the blonde hair and the blue eyes and everything. I said, "He doesn't speak English." She said, "Well, what if I wanted to give him a candy bar? How would I say that in German?" I say, "Believe me, he would understand the candy bar. He wouldn't need a language for the candy bar." And so him and I, we used to, like Logan and I, Carson and I used to go out, and we would see people that we knew, and they would always call him the German.
And what kinds of things do you see Logan and Carson doing one day? Or what are their interests?
I see Carson as being very creative. I'm not sure which way that would go. I see him maybe writing uh, science fiction or fictional books, although it's very difficult to make a living writing. So he would probably, creatively speaking, he would probably have a job like teaching and telling the kids a lot of stories, helping them develop their imaginations.
Yeah.
Now with Logan, I see him. He's kind of a personality guy. He shakes people's hands,
Oh, yeah.
and he calls them by their names, and that's one of the tremendous secrets in our society, is to treat people well if you sincerely mean it. And so I see Logan possibly as a politician or a person that's around people, and that you can have anything you want if you help enough people get what they want.
Mm-hmm.
So he could be an architect where he would help people get the buildings, the structures that they wanted, and they would pay him good money to do that. So he would help people get what they wanted, and then they would, in return, pay him handsomely for a thing like that.
So going back a little bit, some of the greatest influences in your life. What were some of the other influences that maybe weren't on the questions, or other things that were of interest or influenced you?
Well, I would say after the war, or I should say during the war, and Logan and I had watched a movie about this.
Is this World War II?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the United States developed the atomic bomb because we thought Germany had the atomic bomb. And so all these scientists were pulled together by the United States government um, in a location called Los Alamos. It was in New Mexico. And they did, in fact, create the bomb within the 6 month time period that they had. That's fascinating just to read about or to see a movie about how they literally went from not knowing to make this bomb to working out all the details within 6 months.
Hmm.
And so we didn't use it against the Germans because by the time we had finished it, Germany had surrendered. But we did use it against the Japanese because the Japanese, even though they had already lost the war, they were defending Japan, their motherland, and it was going to take many hundreds of thousands of American soldiers who would take their lives trying to invade Japan. So it was decided that um, the United States dropped two bombs on Japan. The first one was very unsettling to them. It just burned everything to the ground. In Japan at that time, the architecture and the materials they used to build things were like very like paper products, light wood, very little cement and mortar and things. So when that bomb hit,
Mm.
it just leveled everything. And so we came out of the war. I should say our fathers did. They came out of the war in 1945. It had ended. But then our ally during the war became our enemy, and that was Russia. Uh, so Russia split Europe, where we did a lot of our fighting against Germany. They split Europe in half so that we could have some and they could have some.
Hmm.
They had a different political system called communism, which is still practiced in China, uh, kind of in Cuba and other places in the world, but it's not nearly as big as it used to be. Um, so anyway, the Russians were able to get their hands on the plans for the atomic bomb,
Mm.
and they developed the atomic bomb. They developed the missiles that would go into the United States, just like we had missiles that would go into Russia. And so that set up a level of paranoia
Mm-hmm.
that affected us children significantly, because what had happened was that there were a series of events that caused we were just a stone's throw away from nuclear war. And so I remember as a child, they would practice every day. They would run the sirens in our town and in every other town in the country. And they would, the television would go off and just, it would be a steady noise of just beep. And that meant that something was wrong. So we would go to our schools and we had to practice um, the things they told us to do if there was a nuclear bomb that hit around us. We had to get under our desks and cover our eyes because they said the blast would be so bright.
Mm.
And in the long run, would all of that have helped? I don't think so. You know, but we lived with that, and I was so anxious about it that every day I would go home because my home was very close to the school. I'd go home at lunchtime and I'd listen to the noon news to see if there was anything new that might precipitate this nuclear war between us. And I did that for years.
Wow. So while you liked to play war, it was also a time of worry and stress all at the same time. Interesting.
Yes, the thought of an atomic war made me stop liking
Hmm.
to play war.
Sure. And your dad was in the war. What are your parents' names and what are their birthdays?
I don't know their birthdays.
Okay.
My father's name was John Charles McGowan. He was born in 1920, and he was an immigrant, or he was the grandson of an immigrant family that moved to Ireland during the Great Famine. In Ireland, they sustained themselves a lot on potatoes,
Hmm.
and there was a famine. For some reason, I don't know why, potatoes, they were unable to grow them.
Hmm.
And people got so hungry, they would actually eat grass.
Ah.
And so his great grandfather, or his grandfather maybe, moved here from Ireland. And then my father's mother, her relatives moved here from Ireland as well. So my father came from the family of McGowans. My grandmother, um, came from the family of O'Briens. And so my father was full Irish.
What were his parents' names?
My grandfather's name was John, and my grandmother's name, they always called her Minnie. I think her name was Mary O'Brien.
Okay.
Now, going back to my mother was born also in 1920. Like my father, she was born in Youngstown. They went to the same high school
Aw.
together, South High. And but my mother had a father. Her father, he had come over here from Germany when he was very young, maybe 10, 11 years old. He taught himself how to speak English.
Mm.
He was a very short man, about 5'3", something like that. And but he was tougher than nails. He suffered from alcoholism when my mother and her three sisters were young. He would get drunk on his day off, and he would chase them around the house. That's what they would do on his days off. He would try to catch them and do something injurious. It wasn't like tag. It was like catch them and do something bad to them. And so my mother's father was directly from Germany, a border town really of Austria in Europe. And then my mother's mother, my grandmother, she was from a family of immigrants from Europe, and they were from the country of Poland. So
What were their names? Your
I
mother's parents?
My grandmother's name